Mandelson is set to be appointed as the UK's new ambassador to Washington. It's as the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer prepares for Donald Trump's presidency, with which he hopes he can forge positive ties. Speaking last month to the Newsagents podcast, Lord Mandelson spoke about why the Democrats lost the election in the US.
I'm afraid that when you're going on the whole time about different issues to do with identity politics, and you're not talking about the economy, and you're not talking about inflation, and you're not talking about what it's like to live from one paycheck to the next, when you don't seem to know or care about crime. These are bound to be the main concerns of the public, and if they feel that a party like the Democrats don't care or don't know or not addressing those issues, why should they vote?
Water bills in England and Wales will increase by an average of £31 a year by 2030. The regulator's given the go-ahead for the larger-than-expected rise, saying firms need the cash for upgrades. Southern Water customers, thousands of whom in Hampshire are currently without running water, face a 53% rise. And the cost of borrowing's been held by the Bank of England. It's decided to keep the base rate of interest at 4.75% after inflation increased for a second month in a row in November. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 94 points at 81.05. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.21. LBC weather: clear spells developing tonight, but cloud and wind remaining in the northwest and a low of 2 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
It's 8:02 on LBC. Welcome if you've just joined us. Now, on a Thursday, we like to talk to one person about what they're up to and then get them to take calls. And today, we've got Robert Harris in the studio, the best-selling novelist whose latest thriller is called Precipice, who's also the author of the novel Conclave, which, as many of you will know because you've been to see it, has been adapted into a new film starring Ralph Fiennes. Is it? Or is it Fiennes?
I believe it's Ralph Fiennes.
Ralph Fiennes. Yeah, I'm not very good on actors. Now, we'll come on to Conclave in a moment and Precipice. But, of course, I did say in the last hour that you are one of Peter Mandelson's best friends, have been for many, many years.
This is a sad curse to carry around.
And you were telling me in the break there that you got a call from him a few minutes ago.
Well, I was just on my way in a taxi on my way over here, and he called. He seemed to think that you'd got some incredible inside track. He was astonished to hear that I was about to go on LBC.
Well, I hope you didn't disabuse him of that.
I said, "This. I'm going to talk to Iain. This is about me, not about you." I don't want to spend an entire hour talking about you.
Well, we won't, I promise. But I've got to sort of ask you about him. Why do you think he is uniquely qualified for this position?
Well, I don't know whether he's uniquely qualified, but I think that he's a big figure, whether you like him or not. I mean, he's a big player and has had a big impact on British politics. Therefore, he'll speak with some authority. And I think that it was quite significant that actually Nigel Farage, of all people, said that Peter Mandelson would make a good ambassador, and he has Trump's ear. So that struck me almost as a kind of invitation. So I think that the Trump people will be receptive to this. So that's part of it. And I think that they'll know that he speaks with the confidence of the Prime Minister and the government. And the other thing is he's an expert on trade, world trade. That was his brief when he was a European Commissioner. I can't think there's a British politician who knows more about that issue, and clearly with Trump's tariff plans, that's going to be a big subject in the next year or two. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of logical reasons for giving him the job.
And also, in the past, Britain has been seen, I think, by many in the United States as almost a bridge to the European Union. Now, obviously, we're no longer members of the European Union, but Peter Mandelson is incredibly well connected across Europe, isn't he?
Yes, I mean, he fulfills that role very well. I mean, he knows a lot of the European politicians. He knows how Europe works and Britain. He's on the inside track. So I think when you examine it, try to examine it dispassionately, it's an appointment that makes a lot of sense. And let's be honest, in a government without a lot of stars, really, at least at the moment, he has some star quality, and I think that he'll be a big figure, which is probably good that someone with his experience is on the inside track.
And I think he'll quite enjoy the diplomatic lifestyle, won't he? Or you can imagine him in the role. And that's quite important in a way, because normally this job goes to a long-serving career diplomat, and it's quite unusual for politicians to be appointed to roles like this.
Yes, I agree. And I think that he will be. He's quite socially adept. I can see him on the Georgetown circuit quite easily, actually. So, I think it all makes a good deal of sense.
I'm also sensing a new novel, The Ambassador.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually. He's given me lots of ideas for novels over the years. So this may be his last gift to me.
Right. Should we say enough Peter Mandelson? Let's get on to Robert Harris.
Let's reluctantly tear ourselves away from the good Lord.
Right. Let's talk about Conclave to begin with, because it's open in the cinemas. I don't know how it's been doing in terms of audiences, but it's one I want to go and see. And I want to see it in the cinema, because sometimes there are some films, like James Bond films, you have to see in the cinema. It's not the same watching it on your TV at home. When a novel gets turned into a movie, how much influence does the original author have on the final product?
A bit, and it depends on the production. On this one, I did actually have quite a lot of input. I'm a producer on the film, and I got on very well with the screenwriter, Peter Strawn, who a lot of listeners will know from the adaptation of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy with Gary Oldman. He did that and won a BAFTA for it. So he was great. I got on well with him. He didn't really want to depart much from the novel, which is great, because sometimes you get a screenwriter and they just want to do their own thing.
I think Michael Dobbs certainly didn't like some of the ways that his books were adapted. Yeah,
I've had similar problems, but not with this production, and so it's been great, actually. And they've kept me in the loop all the way along. You always have a power of veto, in a sense, in that nobody who's bought a novel and wants to turn it into film wants the novelist going around saying, well, I can't stand it. So you can put up a bit of a fight, but technically you don't really have much control.
And so are you on set for quite a lot of it?
No, I just went for a day, which was great. But everybody's working very hard. It's so expensive to make a film that they can't afford to waste a minute, and therefore it's fun for the first hour, and then frankly it starts to get quite boring, because they do the same thing again and again. A bell rings, all the boom mics swing around, silence, and off. It was great to go to Rome, and it was great to go. Most of it was filmed. They reconstructed the Sistine Chapel in this great. So
it was all filmed in Rome.
No, part of it was filmed in Naples. The exterior scenes were filmed in the Medici Villa, and they filmed in this big Cinecittà, it's called, a big studios, 1930s. And I drove up on the day that I went to see it, and there was between takes, and there were 100 cardinals, elderly men and actors, obviously, standing around outside smoking. On mobile phones. It was a brilliant sight. In fact, the director ended up incorporating some of these shots in the movie.
Oh, really? And do the main actors get in touch with you and ask you, well, what did you feel that this character was thinking at this point in this major scene?
Well, I did have lunch with Ralph Fiennes, who's the central character, is almost entirely, he's never off screen, actually, and the director, Ed Berger, about certain things they wanted to pass by me, one of which was that in the novel, the cardinal, the dean of the College of Cardinals, the central figure, is Italian, Cardinal Lamelli, and Ralph Fiennes didn't want to do something with an Italian accent and wanted to make him English. So in the film, he's Cardinal Lawrence, but it makes no difference. But they wanted to talk it over with me before they did it, and talked about his motivation and so on.
And do you get? I mean, when you wrote the book, did you get any feedback from the Vatican? Have they made any comment about this film?
I don't know that they've made any comment about the film. After I did have a talk with Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor while I was researching the book, and then after I'd finished, I thought, well, I'd better send it to him. But I was a little bit nervous, but I did send him an advance copy, and I got a very nice letter back saying, oh, what a wonderful novel. You really did your homework, and I love the central cardinal. He's a cardinal such as all we cardinals would wish to be. As for the spectacular ending, well, I told myself it was only a story. So, and then he said that he wanted to give it to the Pope. He was a great friend of the present Pope, and he asked for me for a copy of the Italian translation, which he said that he was giving to the Pope. But I never got a letter from the Pope, sadly.
What I think about several of your books that I've read is that you must get a kick out of the research phase of this, because when I think of I think I've read sort of 4 of your books, and each of them you must have engaged in a huge amount of research, because you couldn't have written it had you not done so. Do you worry, though, that you are going to make some sort of clanking error that, through no fault of your own, you just had? I mean, Anne Widdecombe said she was always afraid of a chiming clock, because apparently in Julius Caesar there is a chiming clock, and of course there weren't chiming clocks in ancient Rome. And so she was always mortified when she was writing about her book on, I think it's called Act of Treachery, set in Second World War Paris. She was just afraid that she'd just get something wrong. Is that sort of something that you obsess about?
Well, yes, you do have to be careful, and with the best will in the world, one's always likely to make some small slip. But I like to steep myself in the research. I never employ a researcher. I think that's quite a good idea, because that saves you from someone else's error, at least. It's all on me. A lot of novelists, we're thinking of great novelists in the past like Somerset Maugham and Graham Greene, they like to go to places for their inspiration, Cuba, Vietnam, or Malaysia, or wherever. I don't particularly like travelling, but I travel in time, as it were. For me, I go to a period, and I spend 6 months wandering around that period and trying to learn everything I can about it, most of which never ends up in the book. But it's a kind of lived life of learning lots of small details, and that's really the way I do it. And it's terrific.
Yeah, I thought you did that brilliantly. Was it V2?
Oh, yeah.
Where there was a particular chapter which was set, was it in Holland or wherever the V2, no, northern Germany, where the rockets were sort of sent from.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you've got the atmosphere of that coast. You've just got it somehow.
I was very fortunate. I didn't have much time to research that book because we went into lockdown, if you remember. But I did go, and it was a filthy wet day, and it was just great. I mean, it was a horrible day, but for my purposes, the coast of the North Sea, the wind whipping over the sand dunes and through the forest from which the V2s were launched at London. Now, this was manna from heaven for me.
Well, I thought it was an absolutely brilliant book. I absolutely loved it. We'll talk about your latest novel, Precipice, in just a moment. We did cover this in an interview I did with you a few weeks ago for my All Talk podcast. But again, it's so evocative of the atmosphere of pre-World War I London and the political scene at the time with Asquith as Prime Minister. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then we'll take your calls if you have questions that you'd like to put to Robert Harris. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8 on LBC. What I think a lot of people love about your books is that they never quite know what you're going to do next, because you flit from one era to another, ancient Rome to World War II, the latest one prior and during World War One. Do you consciously look at a different period? You did the English Civil War as well, which I imagine must have been a nightmare to research in many ways. But does that give you a lot of satisfaction, where you highlight a period, or do you highlight the period first and then think of a plot, or does it come the other way round?
Well, it's strange. I mean, the first three novels I wrote, Fatherland, which was set in Germany, then Enigma, which was set in wartime England, and then Archangel, which was about Stalin's Russia. And then I thought, well, I'll write a novel about America. It seemed the logical next step. This was some years ago. But I couldn't make it work. And then I had the idea of writing about ancient Rome, or Pompeii, as a kind of allegory for America. And my publishers were slightly hesitant, but they let me go ahead. And really, that was the making of me, because the other books were sort of linked, in a sense, wartime thrillers. And then I suddenly wrote about ancient Rome. And in actual fact, I was talking to my publishers this week, Pompeii is the biggest selling of all my titles in this country anyway, and that gave me license and freedom then to move around, and I've been very fortunate. I haven't been restricted to the same period or the same character, and I just really I come across something and it strikes me as interesting. I mean, the book about the one before Precipice, Act of Oblivion, I was just scrolling through Twitter, as it was then called, and there was a tweet about the greatest manhunt of the 17th century, and it just arrested me immediately. And I thought, well, that would be great. I mean, I wonder who operated it. How would you operate a manhunt in the 17th century? And it grew out of that character who was hunting down the killers of Charles I. And so I started with creating that character. So it's a situation, a character, a few bits of plot, and then I'll go in for it.
So let's talk about Precipice, because it is a fantastic story, and you've woven fact with fiction, which I always think is a fascinating way of telling a story. And I remember reading Michael Dobbs's trilogy of books about Winston Churchill and the Second World War. You're never quite sure which bits were fact and which bits were fiction. So they would encourage you to actually learn more about what actually happened. And just explain to our listeners who haven't read the book, maybe don't know about it, how you've done that.
Well, the book is really built around the love affair that really took place between the Prime Minister in 1914, Herbert Henry Asquith, and a young socialite called Venetia Stanley. He, aristocrat, she was 26 at the 1914, he was 61. He wrote her 560 letters, a third of 1 million words. Sometimes he wrote to her 3 times a day. He became completely obsessed with her. By my estimate, she wrote him at least 300 letters. She kept all his. They're now in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. He destroyed all hers. And so my first thought was, why don't I write her replies? And the moment I started doing that, based on what he'd written, you know, like how it is in correspondence, he referred to what she'd just said, she began to emerge from out of the mists. This character began to appear. And the whole nature of the relationship suddenly became vividly alive. Where they met, what they talked about, who they saw. And he used to send her all the cabinet secrets and military secrets, extraordinary letters from Lord Kitchener, letters from Sir John French, the commander of the British Army in France. I mean, really classified information.
Because you read that and you think, no, that cannot have happened, but it did.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of my books, the things that are fantastically strange and unbelievable are the things that are true, and the prosaic, dull reality are the things that I've invented, quite usually. So that was the first thing. I thought I'd try and rescue Venetia Stanley from obscurity in a way. And then I came across this extraordinary letter he wrote her describing how what he used to do. They used to go for drives every Friday afternoon, even during the First World War, for 2 hours, out into the country. And he used to show her telegrams from ambassadors. And when he showed them to her, he'd then roll them up in a ball and throw them out of the window. And in August 1914, just after the war started, members of the public started handing these in to the police. They were found in fields near Marlow, Henley-on-Thames, Goring-on-Thames. They were found in St James's Park. These were handed in to the local police, who handed them to Scotland Yard, and eventually Scotland Yard went to the Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, and said, "What is this?" And there were only 5 men in the government received these telegrams. They were Grey, the Foreign Secretary, Asquith, the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who was in charge of the Navy, and Lord Kitchener, who was in charge of the Army, and the Colonial Secretary. So one of these 5 was discarding top-secret information, which would enable the Germans to break our codes. Well, he denied it, Asquith, of course, but when I read that, I realised there was a leak inquiry of some primitive sort. And I thought, well, why don't I invent the policeman who has to do this? And that gave me the third character. And then I had the novel. He's the invented character in it, who gets on the trail of this love affair.
But the thing is, when I read the book, I completely believed that character. I assumed that he did actually exist. But I mean, you invented him. But was there any formal police inquiry?
Well, we only know that these decrypts were handed in to the Foreign Office when they were found, and that Grey circulated them all to his 4 colleagues and says, well, which of the 5 of us is responsible for this? Well, Asquith denied it, and we must assume that all the others did. Therefore, there's no record that I'm aware of what happened next. Presumably, faced with a blanket denial by the 5 most prominent politicians in the country, the police dropped it. But I thought, well, what if they didn't drop it? What if MI5, the embryo MI5 of that time, decided to proceed? And what if this man actually discovered what was going on? And I just simply used what Asquith did and have him followed by this policeman. And so he eventually cracks the case and begins intercepting the correspondence. And that character is useful because I think a modern reader is just astonished at the affair, and he is a character who can register our astonishment. I mean, he's our eyes and ears in the novel.
And when you wrote this, were you writing it also with an eye for it to being turned into either a movie or TV series?
No, not at all, and I haven't sold it. So if anyone's listening, who
well, I think
film producer is listening, let me know.
Make a brilliant sort of Netflix series because it is so dramatic and that the characterization is so brilliant that I absolutely think it would work.
Well, that's very good of you. Maybe we should go into business together and produce it.
I'm up for it if you are.
Well, why not? I mean, I never really, truly, I never think of a film or TV series. I think it's fatal if you do that. There's complexity in a novel. There's interior monologue. You go inside characters' heads. I've done a couple of screenplays, but I much prefer writing novels.
But we know how popular that era is through things like Downton Abbey and whatever, which I have to say I can't stand. But people love that sort of Edwardian style of drama. And this fits into it like a hand in a glove, I would say.
Well, it would be good to think of that. I mean, if it could be done, and I think that there are resonances about 1914 that have always been haunting. This was the end of a whole historical era and the beginning of the modern world as the country and the whole world went over the precipice into this terrible conflict. So it's haunting. It's always been haunting, and there's something about the world today which is alarming that I think gives 1914 a bit resonance. And the characters are extraordinary. Kitchener, Churchill, Lloyd George, and Asquith himself. And Venetia, who was a most extraordinary young woman, very intelligent, very amusing, very spirited. And she was certainly no victim of Asquith's, in my view. In the end, she broke off the affair with him and broke his heart and broke the government in its turn.
I mean, she comes across increasingly as the book goes on as a very strong character.
Yeah, I think she was. I had a lot of help from her granddaughter, who showed me letters that she wrote to other people, which helped me get her voice. She was a great friend of powerful men. She was the mistress of Lord Beaverbrook after the First World War. She was a great friend of Winston Churchill's because Churchill's wife Clementine was her first cousin, and she was Clementine's one of her bridesmaids when she married Churchill. So she was really in the British political establishment. Her father had been a Liberal MP, and the family were enormously wealthy. And all the money went, by the end of the Second World War, the family had been reduced from great wealth to not poverty, but it had all been destroyed. Everything changed after 1914.
And the Second World War changed this country in many, many ways, but so did the First World War, didn't it? In the fact that so many lives were lost, the politics of the country changed forever, particularly women got the vote as a result of the Second World War. But I suppose conflicts like that inevitably will change a country, whether you're on the winning side or not.
Yeah, it changed the country. And of course, to a large degree, it bankrupted this country. Asquith introduced old age pensions before the First World War, and there were howls of outrage. It cost £50 million to bring in old age pensions. By the end of the First World War, in the money of that time, Britain had spent £8,000 million. I mean, we, to a large degree, financed the First World War. It was the beginning of the end of British power and wealth. We never really recovered from it. And the agonizing question remains, should we have fought it? Did we have to fight it? Was it worth it, this terrible loss of life? Could we have sat it out? And I don't know that we could. One of the things I wanted to do in the novel, as well as tell the story of the affair, was really try and describe what it's like to be a prime minister, with all the documents and everything passing your desk and the colleagues you have to deal with, the telegrams. And the thing about the Asquith letters is they gave me an hour-by-hour record of what he was doing. So I was able to reconstruct what it was like when he led the country into war.
And did you come to the conclusion that he was totally unsuited to be a war leader?
Yes, I think that it's hard not to feel that. He was the last great Victorian Prime Minister. He was born in 1852. He belonged to a different era. He was a very brilliant man and a very effective, powerful Prime Minister before 1914. But he was getting old and he really didn't understand what was happening. And nobody did, actually. Everybody thought the war would be over by Christmas, 1914. Only Kitchener said it would take at least 3 years. And so I think he was exhausted and temperamentally unsuited to the war leader role. I mean, he liked to drink quite a bit. He was known as Squiff or Squiffy. He liked to have big lunches and dinners. He liked to play bridge every evening, play golf every weekend. I mean, he carried on this sort of Edwardian existence, even as this terrible war was on.
David Cameron was accused of chillaxing, but he certainly took it to a different degree,
unbelievably.
didn't he?
There's a very funny letter he wrote to Venetia in which he describes driving back from a golf course with Lady Tree, who says to him, "Tell me, Mr. Asquith, do you take an interest in the war at all?"
Just before we go to the news, Gordon says, would Robert Harris be offended to be called the Somerset Maugham of our age?
I would not be offended. I think Maugham was a great writer. I think he's terrific.
Well, I have got zillions of text and WhatsApp messages coming in, which I'll put to you in a moment. We'll also take your calls, 0345 6060 973. Robert Harris is with us till 9. It's 8:31, news headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
A man who repeatedly drugged his then wife and invited strangers to rape her while she was unconscious has been sentenced to 20 years in prison in France. He's one of 51 men found guilty of participating in attacks against Giselle Pellico over a 10-year period. As understood, Peter Mandelson will be appointed the UK's new ambassador to Washington. Sir Keir Starmer is preparing for Donald Trump's presidency and is hoping to continue the strong relationship between the US and Britain. And the water regulators announced a 36% rise in average water bills in England and Wales over the next 5 years. Almost 60,000 homes in Hampshire, though, are currently without a supply due to a technical issue. LBC weather, clear spells developing tonight, but cloud and wind remaining in the northwest and a low of 2 degrees.
This is LBC. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
8:33. Robert Harris is with us, a best-selling novelist. His latest book is called Precipice. You may have been to see the movie Conclave in the cinemas in the last couple of weeks. Well, of course, that's based on another of his books, but there are many, many other books that he's written that many of you will have read. If you'd like to ask him a question, the number to call 0345 6060 973. A couple of text questions first. Can you ask Robert Harris, after writing Act of Oblivion, whether he felt sympathy with Puritans who often get a bad press in modern times?
I can't say that I did particularly. I'd always thought that I'd be on the parliamentary side in the Civil War. I'm sure I would have been. But the fanatics, the Puritan fanatics, reminded me of the kind of religious Taliban of the 17th century. It was a very repressive time in Britain. And so I can't say that I felt less sympathy for them by the end of the novel than I had at the beginning.
Right, this is one from Andrew. Robert Harris is a brilliant author and one of my favourites. Rather like he envisaged fatherland if the Germans had won World War II, has he ever envisaged or wanted to write about what might have really happened if Russia had not backed down during the Cuban Missile Crisis? Well, that would be a good one, wouldn't it?
Yes, it might be over quite quickly, I suppose. Neville Shute wrote it, called On the Beach, isn't it, where the survivors of the Holocaust are gathering together. No, it's not a bad idea.
Right, let's go to John in Hammersmith. Hello, John.
Hi, Mr. Harris. I'm a huge fan of your work. I think my first experience with you was Red Dragon, which was made into the movie Manhunter.
That's not me. I'm sorry. That's Thomas Harris, not Robert Harris.
I beg your pardon. Well, I've also read
I quite like the royalties, but I'm afraid I can't claim the credit.
I've also read Pompeii, and I've been there a couple of times. And when I recognise your description of the building at the top of the town where the water comes in, and using an Aquarius as your hero, it was absolutely super.
Oh, that's
First
kind
class.
of you. Thank you.
And I've read Conclave, which had me hooting as a public schoolboy who was raised by Benedictines, and then seeing the movie. It was really first-class work.
Oh, well, that's really kind of you to say. I can certainly claim the credit for those two. And it was wonderful to write about a Roman engineer rather than a gladiator or an emperor or a soldier.
Super.
Yeah, because engineering was the great gift of the Romans to the world in many ways, the roads and the aqueducts.
I am a secret fan of aqueducts, I have to say.
Not many people say that.
I know.
Did you feel that the film accurately reflected the book?
So much so that having been through the public school experience in a Benedictine abbey, I left the movie theatre somewhat PTSD'd.
Oh, really?
Really.
I'm now thinking, should I delve further into this, or possibly best not?
I would. I have a suggestion for a novel. I wrote a book myself, and while it was about Drake in his second voyage in 1586. It sank without a trace. I would say that the research is fun, but the writing of it is so much more fun. I mean, I don't think you've touched on that, how much fun it is to actually write something, and there it is, there's that perfect scene. Not all of it's great. I wrote 120,000 words and had to edit it down to 80 to get it punchy, and I'm sure you do much better than that. But it's great fun to write.
Yeah, it's. I know what you mean. It feels like a great privilege. I can remember now the Saturday afternoon that I first wrote my first paragraph of fiction, which was the opening of Fatherland, and it's exactly as it appears in the book today. And I had to go and lie down. I was so sort of overwhelmed by the fact I could invent anything: the weather, what happened, the character, what they thought. And the wonderful possibilities of invention. I'd written non-fiction books before that, but to be able to actually go inside people's heads and conjure up a whole scene, it was magical, overwhelming.
Because you haven't written non-fiction since then, have you?
No, the last non-fiction book I wrote was a biography of Bernard Ingham, Margaret Thatcher's press secretary.
It's on my bookshelf.
Which was rather... anyway, it gave me such an insight into a totalitarian regime, I wrote Fatherland.
So, clearly, given that was many, many, many years ago, you've got no intention of returning to non-fiction?
No, I think once you've started writing fiction, it's so such a powerful feeling that you don't really want to go back to non-fiction. It's the ability to harness the power of the imagination of the reader in empathy with a character, to enter into, to turn on that sympathy with what a predicament or what someone is doing, to take them through the smells and tastes and feel of a scene. It's so heady. And it seems to just carry so much more resonance that I can't think of doing anything else, really.
And you genuinely, when you wrote that first paragraph of Fatherland, you just knew then that you could do it?
Well, I thought I could do it, and then I made what any listeners to this program who've wanted to write and failed will probably recognise what happened. I had my policeman fishing a dead body out of a lake and then going back to the police headquarters in Berlin, and I had him in an office with various other policemen on about page 8, and I didn't know why they were there, and they didn't know why they were there, and the book kind of stalled at that point, and I had to put it away for a while. And then I came back and I plotted it through to the end. And then, to write a novel without knowing what's going to happen is like embarking on a joke without knowing the punchline. I mean, it alters as you write it, but you have to have some sense of what's going to happen.
Because there are some authors who take an opposite approach. They start writing the first paragraph without a clue how the book is going to end and just see where the characters take them. That's clearly not the approach you take.
No, I'm a fanatic in the other direction. I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Everyone should do it in the way that suits them. Some novelists write a first draft and then throw it away and then start all over again, having cleared their minds with the first draft. I mean, that would drive me insane. I wouldn't want to go back over the story again.
And Jeffrey Archer famously does about 20 drafts of his novels. I mean, when you've written the first draft, how much do you go back and improve, alter, change?
Nothing.
Really?
No.
Leave that to the publisher.
No, they don't change it either. What I sort of write it, the novel, in weekly instalments, and I hand them to my editor, rather like a writer in the 19th century might have done a serialization in Blackwood's magazine or whatever. I do this because I normally start writing a novel in January and I have to finish it at the end of June and it comes out in September. So there isn't room for error. I have to get it right first time. Also, the novels are being translated at the same time into German, Italian or Dutch, and therefore I have to get it right. I mean, there are great software tools now where you can track changes and so on, so that it's quite easy for them to see where I do. Of course, I do make some small revisions and make correct errors and so on, but by and large, I need to get each page more or less right when I finish it.
Sarah says, Robert writes a lot of books. Do the characters stick with him? Can he tell us his favourite character or characters?
Well, I've done 16 novels, and, inevitably you have to sort of forget them and move on to the next one. I have particular favourite books. I'm very fond of the novel I wrote about the Dreyfus Affair, an officer and a spy. In characters, I'm fond of the characters in this novel, actually, the policeman, and also Venetia. I wanted to write a novel about a strong female character. Most of my books are to do with power and often set in the past, and that's a very male world. And one of the pleasures of this book was to write a novel in which the woman really is the central figure. But of course she is a real life character. She's not invented.
Here's one from Philip who says, for an aspiring writer, how would you recommend beating that horrible feeling of staring frozen at a blank page?
Well, don't be afraid of it. I mean, that is part of the process. One good trick, I think, is to get a sort of egg timer, one of those little sand clocks, and just give yourself 10 minutes and say at the end of that 10 minutes you will have written 150 words, say, and do that until you've written 600, 700, 800 words. You will be amazed how that unlocks the subconscious, that actually there is something there. There's just a barrier between you and getting there. I'm afraid the simple truth about writing is you simply have to write. And you have to force yourself to write. It's not necessarily a thing. It's like getting out of bed on a cold winter's day. I mean, and if you've got an excuse to not do it, you won't do it. So it's an effort of will, actually, as much as anything else. And
do you have a target of how many words you write in a day, on average?
I like to do about 800. I mean, I like to write 4,000 or 5,000 words a week. I only work in the mornings. And I quite often work 7 mornings a week. So if you can aim to try and write 20,000 words a month, in 6 months you'll have written 120,000 words. The only way to do big jobs is to break them down into small tasks, really, and writing is the same.
Because the length of a novel is very arbitrary, isn't it? I mean, it could be 70,000 words, it could be 150,000 words, but presumably you always have a target that you're aiming for.
I think somewhere around 100,000 is where you want to land. My books range from 90,000 to 150,000. The trilogy of novels I wrote about Cicero run to 400,000 words. So it's just as long as the story demands, really.
Right, if you'd like to have a word with Robert, the number 0345 6060 973. You can text us on 84850 or WhatsApp us on 0345 6060 973. Quite a lot of text questions coming in on politics as well. We'll turn to that in a moment. It's 8:46.
LBC, this morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Commissioner of Metropolitan Police Sir Mark Rowley's the extraordinary bravery of the men and women who serve under you. You see officers running into blazing building, officers tackling. I think someone snatched a phone, as I recall, and they discover they've got a blade. What do you think about these officers?
They're
Sir Mark?
extraordinary. They're always so understated, and it's just extraordinary.
The possibility you might have to cut 2,300 officers and 400 additional staff, Sir Mark?
These officers won't get sacked. It's a case of, as officers retire, do we replace them all or do we only replace some of them? That's the question we've got to deal with.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
Hey, Harry. Hello.
Oh three four five 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:48 on LBC. Right, let's take a couple of questions that are related to current day politics. Kevin says you write a lot about power, how people get it and what they do when they have it. How would you rate how Keir Starmer has been getting on with that?
Oh, that's spoilt the evening.
Well, I can only read out what I've got.
Yeah, no. Well, everyone said he's not a politician, and I think this is true, actually. And there's things to be said for that. But you know, it's a heck of a thing to be Prime Minister. You have to have an astonishing skill set. You have to be able to tell a story, perhaps more than anything else. I often think that the best politicians are a bit like novelists. People like Margaret Thatcher, to a degree Tony Blair, Winston Churchill perhaps above all. They have a narrative that they convey to people and they follow it. One doesn't quite know what the narrative is here. It's as if they never really quite expected to win in some strange way. So it has been an uncertain beginning. I think everyone would have to concede that.
Well, James has got a related question. He says, once all the drama dies down, do you think Starmer's more serious government will start getting things done? Because I think that's part of the problem, in that there's very few people in this government with any experience of pulling the levers of government. And I wonder, once they actually get used to how to make things change, we will see a very different style of government.
Let's hope so. I mean, one reason for hope is that Keir Starmer had a pretty disastrous start as leader of the opposition, but learned on the job. I mean, he's no fool. So I think as time goes on and he gets more used to the job, he may be able to assert himself more. I think, in fairness, one has to say they've got a really dismal inheritance. Low growth aging population, 9 million people of working age not working, 42% of tax revenue swallowed up by the NHS, a declining, 1.4 children per family, and at the same time as the population is aging. I mean, there are real huge demographic and economic problems that they face. It'd be very hard for any government to deal with them.
Right, we have a call from Thomas in Stirling. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hi, pleasure to speak to you, first of all. I wanted to ask, just in relation to the writing, I actually, just take an opportunity here, so I actually have written my the first ever project I've been able to see through, and I had to do it. It took me a long time to get through it and a lot of self-discipline, but I've managed to do it. My question is, I've got this project now, the first draft completed. I'm going to edit it, but my question is, like, how does someone like me who's got no previous publications, hasn't got those sort of connections, where should I go with that? How would I get that onto the desk of a publisher or the desk of an agent? Sorry.
Well, it's a very good question. I think the honest truth is that the publishers and agents are on the lookout for good material. I mean, the thing, I believe it still exists. Certainly in my day, there was something called the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which details all major publishers and agents. And that gives you a clue as to which agents, I'd start with an agent, frankly, is likely to be interested in your kind of material.
Because I think there are a lot of publishers now who won't accept unasked for manuscripts. They have to have them from agents, which I've always thought is weird.
Yeah.
When I was in publishing, I much preferred dealing with people direct.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I don't have an agent in this country anymore because I prefer just dealing with the publisher without going through an agent. But and the other thing, of course, which has exploded is self-publishing, especially now with ebooks. You don't have to pay all the costs of printing and binding and distribution. So, I think the thing is to write the book to your own satisfaction, edit it, and then show it around to a few people and get their views. And I wish you good luck.
And only show it to people who will actually be honest with you, Thomas, because a lot of people think that they've written the most brilliant book ever, and actually they haven't. And yet none of their family or friends can bring themselves to tell them that actually, this isn't that good. Have you written a novel, or is it non-fiction?
It's a novel. It's actually a Christmas story, to be honest with you. So it's something I've been working on for the past couple of years, on and off, and it's just something I've kind of struggled to fully see through something before, and you've come to bumps where I'm trying to fill gaps in the story, and I've struggled to write it, but I've managed to get it done, but then I've just done it, and I've kind of gone, oh, but what do I do now? And I've had someone who said to me, print it off and give it to me, and I'll show it to a few people. But I'm aware now, like, should we be conscious of people possibly stealing work? Or should we be conscious, when you were saying you can't just send something to a publisher, if you give it to an agent, is there a risk that they could just, I don't know, is that...
No, I don't think that's likely. No. I mean, Iain probably knows this better than I do.
Much as I have a fairly low opinion of a lot of literary agents, I wouldn't accuse them of being capable of doing that, Thomas. But good luck. And thanks for your call. Dear Robert, says David, as a priest, can I just say how much I enjoyed Conclave when I read it? Such a wonderful, wonderful insight, and perhaps, just perhaps, a prophetic insight into the church in the future. I love all your books. Thank you, and keep your God-given gift for words and storytelling coming. That's from Father David, St James in Bushey, should you ever happen to be in Bushey.
Well, I think I might go there. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
And there's a couple of other political ones here. I know how much you love the political ones. Let's just bring them up on the screen. Harold says, is Trump a good politician in your view? Take that any way you like.
Well, I think as he's the first man since Grover Cleveland to win 2 terms that are not consecutive, as a man who came from nowhere in the political establishment to seize the nomination and then win the presidency, one has to say he's one of the most brilliant politicians of our time. I can't say that it's necessarily my cup of tea, but there's no denying his power, and he's a great disruptor, and he's going to be a world historical figure. Of that, there is no doubt. So, yes, I think he's formidable, and we really still are trying to process quite how he did it and what it means. Will it translate into this country? I think is fascinating. Would a Trump figure have ever risen to the top here? I'm not sure that they would. I think he's a uniquely American phenomenon.
Caroline is in Hampstead. Hi, Caroline.
Hello there. I am a published author. I was published really with Collins's as long ago as 1989, and I did a second book for them, but then I got caught up doing something else in the arts. But on the death of my husband, I realised I can only cope in life with going back to writing. So I produced the Split Tree myself. I commissioned my former editor at HarperCollins to do the copy editing, and also commissioned a brilliant young artist to do the cover. And the London Library did put it in their window and take it into their collection. However, I've just finished another book. I've sent it in to Curtis Brown, but if they don't take it on, it covers the British invasion of Buenos Aires and Montevideo in 1806 and 1807, part of the book does. If Curtis Brown don't take me on, I will publish the thing myself again, because really for me, I'm only interested really in research, writing of the book. But then when the baby's born, I feel it's got to have a dress on it. So I will...
So what's your question, Caroline?
Well, the question is, where would I find... I commissioned my former editor at HarperCollins to do the copy editing of the last book, but she's no longer available. Where would I find a good editor? Because I feel the book is really a bit too long.
Well, I can't really advise you where to find a good editor.
Wasn't that yearbook you mentioned? Wouldn't they?
Well, yeah. Well, there is I'm pretty sure it still exists. The Writers and Artists Yearbook is a very good guide to publishers and what sort of books they specialise in, and a lot of agents actually do act as editors themselves. So it may be that the best thing is to find an editor who's sympathetic in a literary agent, and between the agent and the publisher, they can work on the manuscript. Anyway, I wish you good luck with it, and you sound like a natural writer, someone who can't really exist unless they're actually creating something.
Caroline, Curtis Brown are my agents, so I'll have a word with them on your behalf, shall I? Thank you very much indeed for your call. I can't believe we got to the end of the hour, because I could happily go on for another hour, but I think we'd better let you go. Robert, it's been great to see you. If you haven't read any of Robert's books, I can't believe there are many people listening at the moment who haven't, but this last one, Precipice, is really worth it. And if you're searching for a last-minute Christmas present, I think anybody interested in history and politics, they will find it brilliant. So there's a Christmas present idea from you. Robert, good luck. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Ian, and happy Christmas.
And you, thank you. Right, in the next hour, we're going to turn our attention to body positivity, can you believe it? Because the San Francisco Department of Public Health has hired a set of self-described anti-weight-based discrimination experts to consult on weight stigma and weight neutrality. Yes, you heard that right. So is the concept of body positivity helpful, or does it just allow people who are overweight to live in denial about the health problems they are facing? 0345 6060 973. That's the number to call here on LBC over the next 60 minutes.
on your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.